The movie Reefer Madness was produced in 1936. The following year, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed legislation prohibiting the use of marijuana for any purpose. That federal law is still in effect today.
It never should have been illegal. Part of this is the culture. We've been lied to for 80 years. We've had reefer madness shoved down our throats to a point where it's almost impossible to talk about it.
But recently, 14 states have decriminalized marijuana, thus making the possession of small amounts for personal use a misdemeanor, punishable in most cases by a fine. The landscape began to change dramatically in 2012 when a majority of voters in the states of Colorado and Washington voted to legalize the recreational use and possession of small amounts of marijuana. They were followed by Alaska, Oregon, and the District of Columbia in 2014. Will Connecticut be next?
Whether we legalize marijuana in Connecticut early or last, we will stop wasting the potential of the people who happen to smoke marijuana and are having no bad effects from it.
Most people who are really advocating for the legalization of marijuana have used it, they like to use it, they continue to use it, and they want to do so with fewer consequences. And if they can change the legal landscape, they can have that. Most people who use marijuana are going to have almost no problems with it. Only about 3% are going to fall into some level of abuse or dependence of marijuana solely.
A recent Quinnipiac University poll showed that 63% of adults favor the legalization of small quantities for personal use. This study suggests that should Connecticut vote on this issue, it would end prohibition in Connecticut. It would still be illegal in the eyes of the federal government. The Federal Drug Enforcement Administration published a 45-page document titled The Dangers and Consequences of Marijuana Abuse in May of 2014. This document gives hundreds of reasons why prohibition should be maintained. One of the arguments against legalization is that marijuana is a gateway drug. Gateway drug, as defined by Webster's online dictionary, is a habit-forming drug that, while not itself addictive, may lead to the use of other addictive drugs. The DEA report cites a Columbia University study that teens who used marijuana at least once in the last month are 13 times likelier than other teens to use another drug like cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine, and almost 26 times likelier than those teens who have never used marijuana to use another drug.
I would bet my paycheck that the next person I talk to that comes to me with a severe drug and alcohol problem, if I ask them to timeline backwards far enough, marijuana will play a part in their narrative.
Proponents of legalization, like activist group NORML, deny that marijuana leads to harder drugs.
People call marijuana a gateway drug. You've heard that before. I call it a gateway drug too, but 180 degrees from their definition. First of all, I've never met a person who was addicted to heroin that even was interested in cannabis. Not at all. It's a gateway drug off of opiates.
I think there's a lot of evidence that shows people can use marijuana and stop at that. I've also seen people skip over marijuana and go to harsher drugs.
Those in favor of legalization say it will be a tax bonanza for state and federal governments.
I think it would be great for our tax system. There was one study I was reading that in California, they would generate $1 billion in tax revenue just on selling marijuana recreationally.
Colorado collected $72 million in tax revenues in 2014, of which $32 million were from recreational sales.
I think that legalization is inevitable. If Connecticut was smart, we would do it sooner rather than later. Whoever in the Northeast first legalizes marijuana is going to enjoy the benefits of marijuana tourism.
Although Harvard economist Jeffrey Myron has repeatedly called for an end to prohibition, his writings on marijuana's economic impact are often quoted by opponents. He quotes, "It is not a panacea. It is not curing any of our significant ills. There may be good reasons to do it, but the budgetary part is not a crucial reason."
The arguments that get brought up about whether it should be legalized or not legalizing it are usually pretty self-serving. The people that are pushing for legalization, I mean, they'll use an argument saying that, well, we can regulate it and we can tax it and, isn't that a great thing? We'll have a greater revenue source. But they're not pushing this legislation because they want to balance the budget. They're pushing this legislation because they want to smoke marijuana without consequence.
Numerous studies indicate marijuana can pose serious health risks, both long and short term. Research shows that appreciable consumption by adolescents has long-term consequences that are not found in users who started in adulthood. The potency or THC content in marijuana is an area of concern for many. If legalized, some feel the government might either regulate or offer warnings, such as the ones on cigarette packs.
Short-term side effect, we are talking about side effects when people get high, when they have increase of appetites, when they have behavior changes, when they can be danger when they are driving. And when we are talking about long-term side effects, so then when we are talking about brain damage, about other conditions, that they can have a seizure, and again, as I mentioned, this is a stroke risk factors, they get the strokes.
Proponents for legalization say that marijuana is safer than cigarettes and alcohol. They concede that having similar laws for marijuana would be appropriate. Some police officers in the U.S. have banded together to form LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. They believe drug laws should be modified.
And so I can really sympathize with cancer patients who are trying to treat their pain and suffering. I can remember one specific case where it was a situation where they were surveilling a park, and I was asked to stop a vehicle. And I stopped the vehicle, and out comes this man, and he's just, a shell of a man. The skin is gray, and he's a skeleton, and he's got tubes coming out of him. And before a word came out of his mouth, I said, "That's a cancer patient," And we stopped him, we questioned him, and he had bought a bag of weed to ease his symptoms. I mean, this man was probably terminal, to be honest. I mean, the way he looked, and I had to take this guy to jail, because he wanted a bag of weed so he didn't have to throw up and feel pain. And that really broke my heart, And for you to tell one person that, oh, that's not medicine, when it works for them, is wrong, It could have a placebo effect, but if it works for them, then it works for them.
Connecticut decriminalized recreational marijuana use in 2011 and legalized medical marijuana in 2012. But many people are still confused about our current laws.
The perception in the general public is it is okay, it is legal to use marijuana.
I think initially what we did see when it became decriminalized is that some students thought it would be okay to bring it into school. Now, just because it was decriminalized does not mean that students can possess it and bring it into school.
I'm sorry to be pessimistic about it, but I don't think I can say that we are winning the war against drugs. That would be a wrong thing to say. We are not. So in that phase, are we better off with getting cleaner drugs as opposed to what one can get on the street?
My personal opinion is that we should have done it long ago. I'm in favor of legalization.
When you go back as a parent, and I'm a parent, and I have 2 kids and 3 grandkids now, and obviously, I'm concerned that if this were to become to be legal, what impact it will have, not so much on my children because they're all adults at this point, but on my grandchildren as they grow up. Obviously, that's a concern. But on the other hand, I cannot live in a world which is not realistic. And the real world is all of these drugs are present. There's always going to be subject matters which are uncomfortable. But just because it's uncomfortable does not mean you don't talk about it.
The legislature needs to clarify our laws, but the issue is so controversial that we believe it should be put to a public referendum. There should be a full debate so that everyone would understand the issue and the law.
You definitely need to talk about it, but you need to make sure that there's enough time, every aspect is explored to its fullest before we decide which direction our state should go.